dive in. Really thrilled to have Evan back with us today. And really quickly, one of the things that I tell folks all the time is that the Stewardship for All Seasons program and ministry in general can't be compartmentalized very well, right? Stewardship is not its own little hermetically sealed box. It's a part of ministry. And one of the things I love about this session is that that's what we're going to remember today, and really dive into talking about our mission and who we're called to be, because really behind all of it is God's mission in the world. I love that old line, we've all heard it lots of times. God's church doesn't have God's church doesn't have a mission, God's mission has a church, right? So God's mission in the world is there, and God uses us in the church to be a part of that, so that's really an honor. So with that, we'll get started with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
God, you've called us here today together to be in your presence, to dream about where you're calling us. Help us to keep you as the center of these conversations. Lord, we know there's so many other things that swirl around us. But for these 2 hours, you've given us these 2 hours. They're a gift to us to be protected from all the other things that clamor for our attention, and to really focus on where you're calling us to be in the world and the ways that we can reach that together. We thank you for that gift in Christ's name. Amen. All right.
Good to be back with you all. I know that last time I wasn't here, but since it's the first time I've been back in person, let me say a personal apology. In October, when I asked you to come with your communication stuff and bring in communications people and have your samples, that was the plan. And I didn't realize that it had changed, and I'm sorry that many of you did that and came in with the wrong people. So please forgive our communications and me personally for bringing this way. Today we're going to do 2 topics. The first topic is going to be strategic planning. We'll spend a little over an hour on strategic planning, maybe about an hour, 10 minutes or so. We'll have a small break, and then we'll come back and we'll work on special gifts appeals. You all are scheduled again in March, and in March, I believe it's the 10th for you all. And we're back here, correct, Matt?
Yes.
Okay.
Because we're going to be meeting with the other group as well.
Yes, all together, and Mike will be with you, and we'll be doing communications for real. Yes, for real, I promise. So feel free to bring other folks with you when you come to that meeting on that day. And thank you to Bayshore for hosting us and for the hospitality. I've lost you. Oh, there you are. I saw you walk in and then I couldn't find you.
And for the attention to detail, the signs that are on the doors and stuff, I love it.
Yeah, thank you for the tables and all that. And thanks to our digital recording as well. Maybe we'll put this up on Basecamp for everybody in case you had folks that weren't. So I think I've shared this story with many of you before, but when I was early in my career, I was called to be the executive director of one of our ELCA outdoor ministries, and I moved to rural Texas. And on one of my first Sundays in that congregation in rural Texas, I went to go guest preach at a local congregation called Emmanuel's Lutheran Church in Greenvine. Greenvine's like a spot on the map, halfway between Austin and Houston. And I went to the church, and my wife came with me. We didn't have any kids at that time. And like a good Lutheran, she sat in the back of the church, and I went to the front of the church. And as the service went on, I could see there was this lovely older couple just chatting her up. So when we got in the car to go home, I said to Heather, what were they talking to you about? They seemed really friendly. And she said, oh, don't worry about it. And I thought, oh, did I step on something? What did I say? And I said, honey, really, what were they talking about? She said, Evan, just let it go. And I was like, well, Heather, I'm starting to get mad. Like, what did I do? And she goes, they asked if I was the visiting preacher's daughter. Yeah, my wife and I are 6 months apart in age, right? But it's about perspective. The direction from which we come, the direction to which we go, shapes that which we see. Perspective is really, really critical. From my perspective, I had to crawl home to Bastrop, Texas, from Greenvine, Texas, through the mud and muck of Central Texas. From Heather's perspective, she didn't even need the car. She just kind of floated, all the way home. And from the perspective of anyone in church that morning, they were doing what they're called to do, which is be warm and welcoming to a guest in their midst. Strategic planning is about perspective. And it's not about, oftentimes we think about planning as getting everybody on the same perspective. It's not at all. Strategic planning is about gathering perspective. It's about looking at your context from all the different vantage points from which it can be seen to paint the whole picture. Oftentimes from wherever we sit, whether we're sitting in the pew as a member or sitting as a council member or sitting as a staff member or sitting as a called leader of the church in an ordained or rostered position, we're only looking at things from one direction, right? We're looking at it from our vantage point. Sometimes we can oscillate left or right a little bit, but we never get the 3D image of everything that we're doing. And that's what strategic planning is really about. It's about getting a perspective and collecting a perspective together so that we can have work and a ministry that's meaningful in its most impactful way. So in the SAS program, we forced you all last summer to say, okay, what's the most important things you're going to do next year? And what are the quantifiable costs of those things so that you can show your donors impact, right? And we created ministry initiatives. In the long term, we don't want you to make up ministry initiatives every year. We want your ministry initiatives to be part of the long-term plans of your church so that people can tie their generosity, their impact, and progress to the long-term impact that the congregation is making in the world and to know what's coming. In year one, we're a bit like the keto diet, right? And everyone always laughs when I say that. But the keto diet works. If you want to lose some weight quickly, for most people, you go on the keto diet, you can drop some weight quickly. As soon as you start eating carbs again, you start gaining weight back again, right? Until you learn to maintain a balance. Same is true. Put some fundamental best practices into your congregation that are a little different from the way you lived before. Talk about impact directly, tie giving to direct impact with ministry initiatives, say thank you to people, revolutionary keto diet, and begin to talk in different ways, and we get this quick weight loss, right? We get this quick gain in giving. That gain isn't going to gain like that every year unless you take on all the other parts of SAS, and that's what that's what Matt was saying when he was saying you can't divide out the comprehensive nature of this. In year two, as you begin to work at this, you're going to have a 6 to 7% bump. So in year one, we talked about a 10 to 15% bump on pledge giving from the year before, 10% on budget if you don't have no pledging history. Now you're going to be at a 6 to 7% bump in year two, and then in year three, you're going to move down to kind of a more general COLA kind of increase at a 2 to 3% on annual fund work. But your other giving and your other growth is going to come through the other areas of giving. So it's going to come through special appeals, it's going to come through capital campaigns, it's going to come through deferred giving in those ways. So to get there and to make sure all these things are tying together, having a full strategic planning effort at some point in the life of your context is going to be really important so that you have a long-term horizon for which you're aiming to, and which you're not just flowing in the wind. Because that excitement that came with new ministry initiative, with people feeling like we know where we're going, that will begin to have a negative yield if they feel like we're going this way, we're going that way, we're going this way. So we gave them direction in the first year, now we have to get that direction to continue heading in the same area so that we don't lose those things. So as such, let's do an exercise. This is, I realize, a little small on the screen for some, but this is called num letters. It's an exercise I use. These are phrases that are algorithms, right? So 26L of the A is 26 letters of the, this is your participation part, folks, right? So 26 letters of the alphabet, right? So what's 7W of the AW?
Wonders of the world.
Wonders of the ancient world. Yeah, there we go. How about 12S of the Z? Signs of the zodiac. How about 54C and the D with the J? Cards in the deck with the jokers. 1 ML on the CF. Cards in the deck. I'm sorry, 1 ML on the CF. No, we'll come back to it. It's the hardest one on the board. 200D for PG&M.
$200.
All right, I have to pause and give a high five here because in about 10 years of using this exercise, that's the first time in hundreds of times of doing this that anyone got it on the very first time without me giving a clue. Literally. Now they messed up my presentation. Just kidding. But it's true, the first time on the first one. 57 HV? Heinz varieties. There we go. 12 D of C?
Days of Christmas.
No, Christians, it's disciples of Christ. I'm kidding. Of course, I set you up for that one. It's Days of Christmas or Disciples of Christ. 93 million M to the S.
Miles to the sun.
Miles to the sun. Look at what happened in this. Come on in. There's a seat right there if you need one at the back end of the table. Look at what happened on this. 93 million miles to the sun is so apparent. It's so universal that almost everybody in the room got it, right? Looked at it and said it's 93 miles to the 93 million miles to the sun. Same with 26L of the A. So universal that we all get it the very first time, right? But we have one on the board that we haven't gotten yet, right? 1 ml on the CF. Do you know it? All right. What is it? One maple leaf on the Canadian flag. Have you done this with me before? Nobody has ever gotten that without.
I've heard the 200 one, I've not heard the one.
Well, where did you grow up? In Nebraska, okay. So I always have to tell people that I grew up in northern Vermont, or northern Vermont, as we say up there. And in northern Vermont, we play a lot of hockey, right? And in hockey, you sing 2 national anthems. And so because you're often playing a Canadian team, and so there's Canadian flag flying, or I live literally like 40 minutes from the border, I'd see the Canadian flag almost every day. This is contextually for me something that makes exact sense as soon as I see it, because I saw it every day. It's my perspective. I get it. These are universal. But notice what else happened in here. 7 wonders of the ancient world. 2 people in the room got it immediately as they saw it, right? Only 2 people. 12 signs of the zodiac came out right here. 54 cards on the deck, the 1 gambler in the room got it as soon as it came out, right? 200B for PG and M. Only pastor had this experience where she got mad at her family this Christmas and shook the board and it fell off, right? The 57 Heinz variety. Now, Matt threw me off a little bit because he's a little younger than the normal person that gets this. But 57 Heinz variety was the #1 brand in grocery stores for decades, right? But we don't have that anymore. They used to make beans, they used to make soups, they still do, but now we private label everything, so people don't know Heinz variety the way they did. This is happening in our congregations, right? We're sitting in a pew looking at the same board, but we're not all seeing the same thing. Sometimes people are seeing just the algorithm, sometimes people are seeing the whole phrase, and it's like the Matrix. Suddenly it all comes together, right? We all get it. But people in the room are seeing it, and it makes sense to them. But it doesn't make sense to you, or it makes sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to them. And this comes into contact with everything we do. Why aren't people engaging in this program? Why aren't people reading this piece? Why aren't people giving in this way? Why aren't people doing this? This all is about getting people's perspective and painting a picture that makes sense to everybody. And this strategic plan is a big portion of this. There's 2 parts of a strategic plan. There's what we call the identity portion of a strategic plan, and there's what we call the actionable portion or the action portion of the strategic plan. By the way, after this session today, we will load up the PowerPoints that go with this, because I'm going to flip between 2, and we'll also load up a couple tools that you can use on your own should you choose or want to use those tools while you're planning, including a couple different formats for creating a strategic plan and in its publishable format, and then some manuals to help you do this work if you choose to do it on your own. Identity is mission, vision, core values, all right? And we're going to go through all these in details, but identity is that who we are, whose we are, what do we exist to do, mission, vision, core values. Action is what us type A people like to do, which is make lists of things to do, right? And we break them into categories that we refer to as ministry result areas, goals, and objectives. Again, if you've done this in business before, I know many of you have, you might have called these key result areas or core strategies, or if you did it in the 90s, you probably called them big bets because a guy wrote a book, and that's what happens when we write books. And so it's very popular. And then goals are the things where we begin to be able to measure, and then tacticals or objectives are those things that make things happen. When we go into strategic planning, it looks a bit like this. You've seen this before, and I want to say that the world is full of beautiful 60-page strategic plans that sit on a shelf and collect dust and are a total waste of time, right? And part of what's given us a bad taste in our mouth about strategic planning is that it's been poorly used. We put a lot of effort, a lot of resource into it, and then it never lives. And at the risk of quoting David Swartling, if anybody knew David, he was the secretary for the ELCA for a little less than a decade, at the national level, a called position to the church for a layperson in that context, and is responsible for all the constitutional stuff and all that sort of thing. In the office of the secretary, he would say the Constitution is a living, breathing document. A strategic plan is a living, breathing document. It is only as good as you use it. It's not a one and done. You don't do it and then leave it on the shelf. It's something that you live in every day as an organization. And so part of what we've done is we've created these huge, beautiful strategic plans. That's not the point of this. But in a strategic planning format, we have to build on what we've had in the past. I'll say some more about this. So we have history. We have SWOT, right? SWOT is one way to get at knowing the organization. Another way is something called appreciative inquiry. These are exercises we do to understand an internal and external analysis. If you've never seen this acronym before, typically there's only one T. It's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I had a professor in grad school that added a T that calls it trends. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and trends. Strengths and weaknesses are purely internal. These are the things that we have or don't have that allow us to or keep us from accomplishing our mission, right? So a strength is something we possess as an entity that can help us accomplish our mission. A weakness is something we possess that can keep us from accomplishing our mission. Opportunities or threats can be internal or external. So an opportunity can live inside the congregation, it can be outside of the congregation. So an opportunity inside the congregation, we just got an influx of new families and we have all of this energy around young kids, right? Opportunity. Or a threat might be, there's a divisive issue going on in the life of the congregation right now, and that's a threat in the congregation. Trends, on the other hand, are purely external. So these are things that I have no control over, but affect the good, or the work of my organization, my ability to meet my mission. So a trend might be the population of our town is decreasing quickly as everybody moves to the center of town or moves out to the country or whatever it might be. Mission and vision, guiding principles or core values. That's the same thing. People call them different things, but core values. These are the markers on the road map. We'll go a little more deep into these. These are the boundaries of the road. We can't cross outside of these. The bumpers or gutters on the side of the bowling alley, whatever metaphor you want to use. When we're outside of these, we are no longer ourselves. So this is the exterior boundary of our identity. And if we ever find ourselves outside of our identity, we're not who we say we are. Mission and vision, again, we're going to go into these deeply in a moment, but mission is what you're going to do in the world. Vision is what the world is going to look like when you accomplish your mission. They're two different things. They're often interchanged, and it's not a make or break or die on the mountain kind of thing. But mission is what you're going to do in the world. Vision is what the world is going to look like when you accomplish your mission. Mission is usually short. Vision is usually long and descriptive. Mission is externally used. Vision is a little more internally used for governance and for membership, if you will. Ministry result areas, again, that's our term for what people call core strategies, key result areas. Ministry result areas are chapter titles. So 3 to 5 chapter titles that you use in order to organize the work of your strategic plan. A strategic plan won't have everything that the organization is going to do in it. It won't encompass everything. There are some things that are going to happen even though they're not written in the strategic plan. And that's one of the hardest things for a congregation because we all have so much sweat equity and ownership and stuff, right? And so Bob will come and go, why is the bell choir not in the strategic plan, right? Bob, because we don't really need to plan for you, right? You've got it under control. What we're doing in a strategic plan is we're saying these are the 3 to 5 areas that we're going to focus on in the next defined period. And we're not saying we're not going to do other things necessarily, but what we are saying is if the rubber meets the road and we have to choose, these are the things that we think God is calling us to do most clearly in these next 3 to 5 years. We're going to prioritize those. I use the term 3 to 5 years. I'm often asked, how long do you plan for? And the answer is different in every context, but my general answer is I don't actionably plan for more than 3 years. Because I don't think in this context today we can sufficiently project actionable steps more than 3 years out. The world is just different, and it will be different 3 years from now. However, the ministry result area level, the vision level, often carries longer term than that. It may carry 10 or 20 years out as far as where we hope for and forecast the community going in those years, but our actionable steps are limited to kind of a 2 to 3 year format. In that same thing, we go down into goals and objectives. I'll talk more about each of these, but goals are measurable, defined steps. Tactics are the tactile little things that we have to do. So this is kind of like a pyramid. If we complete objectives, we make progress towards goals. If we complete goals, we make progress towards ministry result areas. If we complete ministry result areas, we make progress towards our mission. If we ever see our vision, it's time for a new mission, right? Because you've accomplished everything that you set out to do. Mission and vision, the identity portion of the strategic plan, along with your core values, they're not going to change every 3 to 5 years. Those should live beyond the life of the actionable portion of the plan, and often live for several cycles of the plan. Cycles of a plan, that's because this is, like SAS, this is not a one and done. You don't plan once, it's cyclical, right? So you're visioning, you're in a time of discernment, you move into your action planning, where we're laying out what we're going to do. You come back around and you assess where you've been and what you've done, and you go and either affirm your vision or start revisioning again, and you come through. Every time we vision, it's not necessarily entirely new, but we're coming back and doing a route check. Are we still on course? Is this where we're going? Is this where God's calling us? And then we take our action steps and we come back around and do this. The first time you take on this effort, if you're going all the way back to the identity portion of planning, and we're really going into that mission, vision, core values, and then into action planning, this is at minimum a 6-month process. Everybody will say, well, can we do it faster than that? And I can say you can, but you won't, right? Just knowing the way that congregations function, the way that we're able to gather volunteers together, the way that we gather information, this will be a 6-month process. When you come back next time, 2.5 to 3 years from now, it won't be a 6-month process if you're not going all the way back to mission and vision. If you've got that in place, then we'll be at a point where we're probably more at like a 2.5 month process or so, maybe 3-month process to get back to these things. This is what I call the consultant slide. This is where we put up something that looks really technical, right? To say something really simple, but that's how consultants make their living. So this is what GSB calls the provolution curve. And if you will follow me with this, on the bottom left-hand slide, what this says over here is dream and fantasize, new vision, and energy, and then remove the mythology from things. Value systems or beliefs, new objectives, new structures, and new actions. Innovate, plan, organize, deploy. And then it says conserve, reform, revolt, and react. Over here we have no doubt, operational doubt, ideological doubt, ethical doubt, and then absolute doubt or alienation. What happens is we often think of organizations growing like this at a 45-degree angle. But no organization grows like that. Organizations grow through oscillation. So we have a high degree of energy that comes into the life of an organization, and we have that area where someone has a new idea, a dream, and we're fantasizing about what the future can be. We're taking the energy and putting it into there. We have this steep curve upwards. We're taking all the mythology out. What do I mean by mythology? I mean reality versus implied reality. We've never done that before, right? We're creating values and belief systems. We're innovating. We're planning. The new objectives begin. We're seeing some result in those things. We're putting our structures in place to organize and deploy our resources. And right when we get to the top of the hill, we're tired because we've been pedaling uphill. And the organization naturally wants to conserve energy a little bit. So the whole organization collectively takes a breath. You're coasting on your pedals for a minute. You're not pedaling, right? And everything's feeling good because we've just climbed to the top of the mountain. And we're over that, and we start to descend on the backside. Completely normal for an organization and healthy. So we're conserving and we're reforming. And as we do that, when we start to conserve, we've got no doubt everything's great, right? And then we start to get to that question of operational doubt. Operational doubt is, are we doing this the right way? right? Is this what we should be doing? Is this how it works? And then as we begin to reform, and those reforms aren't working to get us go up again, we get to this point between revolt and ideological doubt where we're saying, is this even the right thing to do at all? Like, should we even be doing this? And if we don't turn the ship at that point, then we come down to this ethical doubt, right? And then alienation, and we lose the whole thing. Now, this happens often, and when we get to here, it's not the end of the world. You haven't died, but you have to start way back down there again. So ever getting to a higher peak is almost impossible because you've lost all that momentum. Instead, we want to slide. What's the app where the birds slide, right? And you're pushing the birds. Don't pretend like you've never played these things on your airplanes. Anyway, we're trying to bounce those next levels. So the critical point here is to catch your organization at this point and go back into that next cycle where the new objectives and the new structures come back before you have to create value systems and beliefs again, right? So our values and our core values, our identity, our mission, we catch the organization before those come into doubt. And we take the new objectives back up into this. How does this play in the life of a congregation? Very commonly in a couple places. One is we often tell you that one of the situations in SAS that has the most success is congregations that are under transition when they come into it. So congregations who have an interim pastor or in an interim situation, I know a couple of you were in this. Why? Because you're usually kind of starting down here, right, at that point. And so you have this great momentum and you're going up that steep hill really quickly, right? We also see that just after you make your call, we usually find ourselves right in here. Because the whole organization's just been pedaling uphill for so long that all of a sudden we're like, oh, thank goodness Pastor Bessie's here, right? And then everyone just kind of stops and collectively stops for a moment. And we feel that organization just begin to coast as we get used to one another. And then we also see from there, if you have come in all the way down to here, let's say, and your call's happening at this point, for whatever reason in the life of your congregation, that boost that you get as soon as a new pastor comes, right, where everyone wants to come see the new show. Well, you guys aren't laughing at me. When everyone wants to come and meet the new pastor and we get that bump right into here too, right, where we see that kind of oscillation come back up from some of these natural but not normally timed events in the life of the congregation. Certainly there are other things in our laity that cause these as well, but we see that. Does this make sense to folks? Mm-hmm. Does it feel real to you in what you've experienced in your organization? So we're doing two things. I'm setting the field for you here is like, when do you plan? Well, you don't plan when you're in this point, all right? This is a bad place to plan. This is a great place to plan. This is okay, right? Here, you're working, and right here we're planning. So right here on the left side and right here on the right side are our planning places. This is implementation. This is right the ship, right? We don't put a strategic plan for how we're going to bail, right? If the ship's sinking, you just bail. We'll plan once the ship's not sinking anymore. One time a synod that shall remain nameless asked me, the bishop asked me as a favor, will you come in and we work with this congregation? They've been in extreme turmoil. They need a plan. We're not going to let them go through the call process until they complete a strategic plan with you and get their ship in order. Well, naively I said, okay, for you. And we went in there and we started this work. And after one of the listening sessions, I'll tell you what we do in listening in a moment. I normally don't bring the whole congregation together, but I brought the whole congregation together to deliver my report of the listening. And I said, you can't do anything until you learn to be nice to one another. Like, until you act like the church, you can't do anything. And I was the least popular person in the room, right? But you don't go to the doctor to tell you you're perfectly healthy, right? You go to the doctor to find out what's going on. And the congregational president was walking out with me, and she goes, man, you're braver than I am. I said, no, I'm not. I'm leaving. Like, I have to go back in there. I'm done. But so we don't want to plan. We don't want to plan at this point, right? If you're at this point, there are other health steps that we can take to get you back into the other directions. It's not a strategic planning moment. And that's important because you can create more damage than good if you plan at the wrong times. Does that make sense? So, in our planning, one of the things we
Can I ask you a
do.
question?
Yeah, please go ahead anytime.
Is, like this little graph here,
Uh-huh.
could that be like a wind sprint for one congregation and a marathon for another?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
because like, with our congregation, we're great at looking 3 to 6 months out, but anything like beyond a year, it's, because things change so much for us, that's about, so we have all these quick wind sprints, so
Right.
reassess and,
Yeah.
so can those be quicker hits?
Yeah, just like, I don't want to use the metaphor, but just like any wave variance, right? Those waves can be interspersed this close, they can be interspersed this close, they can be interspersed this close, and it can really depend on what's going on. Health and new energy and new opportunities can cause those oscillations to happen really quickly in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and we see this kind of, we feel like it's the 45-degree angle of growth, but what's really happened is just this quick bounce. At the same time, threats, trends, other things, lack of energy in the organization can cause those to space out over a time, where this doesn't necessarily go all the way down to here,
Right.
but it holds out at here
That's
forever.
what we serve, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
And you
thanks.
just hold. So yeah, it definitely changes context to context for sure. So we go into this point of listening in the life of a congregation, and when we go into strategic planning. I do 3 listenings when I strategic plan with a congregation. And by the way, you can do this on your own if you have the right tools in your community. If you don't have the right tools in your community, Matt's a resource for you. He has a lot of passion around this, and he and his office can help you navigate this process, or GSB and our consultants can help you navigate this too. Not a sales pitch. For congregations that are in SAS, we do this at about the quarter of the cost of what it normally costs if you did this alone on your own, if you wanted outside. And Matt is available for you too, depending on your context. But we do these listenings, 3 listenings. The first listening is an internal listening to the leadership, right? And by leadership, that is elected leaders, staff leaders, and what I call key authenticators. So anybody in the community that we need to have their voice in the room, right? Usually, depending on the size of your congregation, this is somewhere between 40 and 100 people in a room for about a 3-hour period, going through a series of appreciative inquiry and SWOT type exercises. When we do it, it's a really fun day, it's a laughing day, we gather information from folks, working in small groups, and what we're looking for in that day, first is more in-depth information, because we have small groups. Secondly, an opportunity for the room to weigh itself out of implied reality. So you've heard me talk about implied reality. For those that haven't heard it before, reality is I can't fly home to Texas under my own power, right? No way I can flap my arms hard enough. Implied reality is I can't run a marathon. If I wanted to, I could start now, sometime very long from now, perhaps very slowly, I could possibly complete a marathon, right? That's the difference between reality and implied reality. So a congregation has implied reality. You're sitting there thinking about an opportunity, and the voice of the naysayer is in your head. Or the, we've never done it that way before is in your head, or this is in your head, or that's in your head. So what this community day does is it allows for that perspective gathering from a wider group in a way that people hear each other, and it takes the weight of the negativity out of the room, and it brings the reality of the true barriers and the true things up in the room in a way that don't cause us to stumble. So what do I mean by that? A congregation in Littleton, Colorado, St. Philip Lutheran Church in Littleton, Colorado, doing this leadership day with us. And in the midst of this leadership day, one of the things we do is an exercise around the history of the congregation. As we're in this room with 100, 120 people, all of a sudden it hits them. What's wrong in their congregation? Littleton makes sense to anybody, right? What happened in Littleton? Shooting at the school, right? Well, that shooting was about 18 years ago now, a little over 18 years ago. And this church, St. Philip in Littleton, was the church that allowed the funeral for the shooter. He had been a Lutheran and been connected tangentially to their community, and the pastor at that time allowed his funeral to take place at the church. As you can imagine, there was a variety of feelings around that event, and the church almost split over this idea, right? Can we, can't we? What's our responsibility to the community? In the midst of that, you also have a community that's mourning the loss of countless children in their room. To this day, I was literally with the church, and next door to the church there's a shopping center, and a car backfired in the shopping center, and the whole town shut down, and police came, and I mean, it was a response like you've never seen before. This is a central thing in the life of this church. But Colorado, one of the youngest states in our country, average age 33.7, and this church, in one of the fastest growing areas of our country, was 50% people who were there and 50% people who weren't there. So for 50% of the people in their church, this event was the central event in their life and in their church. For 50% of the church, they didn't even know what they were talking about. And when this came up and they started looking, oh, every decision we're making is dividing down this line. And it was just incredible that they had never realized this before. But in this history moment, in this history exercise, we were able to define this and find this out. So that's the one listening. One day, gather everybody together. It's usually helpful to have an outside facilitator for this, because then you all as leaders can participate in this. Also, people will answer more directly. Don't do this as one group. Break it into small groups so you can weight the responses. So one of the keys to all listening is that we're not necessarily looking for one-offs. We're looking for trends in the life of your congregation. There's brilliance in one-offs, but that one negative comment will eat your brain like a worm, right? And so you gotta watch out for that. So we look for trends. One just tactical thing, whatever exercises you're going to do, create a survey monkey. Have a table captain at every survey, or at every table, and collect it all through a survey monkey. That way you're not going home with 80 pounds of butcher paper that's written on in handwriting you can't read, trying to articulate what was maybe written at a table one time in church. Just collect it all, then you can also take it very easily and weight it back to people, give it back to people, and all that sort of thing. There's your tactical tip of the day. The second listening is a survey. This is also internal, but it's a little broader scope. Your survey, a couple things about surveying folks. One, it's really helpful to use a survey tool that allows you to benchmark against other data. So you can ask all sorts of questions. On a scale of 1 to 5, how happy are you with our church? And not know what that means, right? And let me tell you the example of this. First of all, there's a lot of great benchmarking tools out there. We have a benchmarking tool that we've created. We ask the same 13 questions every time we do a congregational survey, so we can compare you to a couple hundred other congregations and know what the context is. There's other tools out there like Holy Cow, which is a great tool. They use 167 questions to do that. They're all like a personality test. We're asking the same question 100 different ways to get there. They do it with a broader survey. We do it with a shorter survey. There's others out there as well. At the end of the day, you're looking to benchmark. We use Net Promoter Score. I think we're the only organization that uses Net Promoter Score with congregations. Anyone know what Net Promoter Score is? Harvard studied the way that we answer questions. And particularly, they studied for about 30 years the way that we answer the questions, in general, how satisfied were you with your X, right? So when you leave a hotel, in general, how satisfied were you with your stay at the hotel? In general, how satisfied were you with your meal at the restaurant? In general, how satisfied with our life together at St. Bede's and the Weeds, right? Scale of 1 to 9, or 1 to 10. And what they found is that people that answer that question a 9 or a 10 walk out and can't help but sing your praises. They're net promoters. A 9 or a 10, that person walks out and like, hey man, have you tried St. Bede's and the Weeds? Man, their worship is awesome, right? Can't wait to have you. 6 or 7, or excuse me, 7 or 8 are neutrals. Now that blows us away as Lutherans, right? We're like, hang on, a 7 is a very respectable score, right? It goes right with our hot dishes, and it's very safe. It's not spicy. It's a perfectly appropriate score. But it's not. It's a neutral score. 7 and 8 are neutral scores in the way that human beings answer that question in the United States. 6 and below are net detractors. Someone who scores you a 6 or below are actually people that walk out and have the negative. Oh my gosh, you would not believe when I saw St. Bede's in the Weeds yesterday, right? That is incredibly important for us to know, because 6 seems like a moderate score. But what we know about the way that people answer these questions is if they've answered a 6, they're just being nice to you, right? They've gone to this point where they're being nice to you. The reason why this is important is because we can then benchmark where we're going. So in the Rocky Mountain Synod, we were working with the Office of the Bishop in the Rocky Mountain Synod We did a survey for the Synod. We had 756 responses to this survey. The Synod got email addresses from all the council leadership from all their congregations. Remarkable response rate to this. And we had a net promoter score of 19%. What does 19% equate to? Used car sales and insurance sales, no offense to anyone who's in there, are happy with about a 30 to 35% market. Why is the church not growing? Because we have a 19% net promoter score, right? Now, I know this is only one lens. Please don't take it as simple as I'm making it. So I broke it out and I said, okay, we have 119 rostered leaders in here out of the 756 people. The lay people must be skewing this. The lay people are mad. And I brought just the rostered leader score. It was lower. So then we had our instruction, like, what do we do? So we went out and we met with all the roster leaders and we found out what the issues were that were that were causing this to feel this way. Why is the church not growing, right? Because nobody is happy about what we're doing. There were external pressures that were causing this. They weren't about the program itself. They were about external pressures. The office of the bishop began to address those within the life of the synod. They've removed those. They went 3 years. They bumped up into the high 20s now. That doesn't seem like a huge move, but that's a huge move in 3 years for the life of theirs. And you feel the momentum going in this organization. Number of other questions that are weighted, then 2 open responses. When you're surveying, here's the other important thing. You don't have to ask a negative question to get a negative response, all right? I could ask a good Lutheran, what's your favorite ice cream at the potluck? And they will say vanilla, and I hate the color of the carpet and narthex. It is the way that we answer these questions as church. And I tell you, I've done this with hundreds of groups. We ask 2 questions. If St. Bede's in the Weeds had unlimited time, resources, and staff, what would you like to see us take on, right? And then what are your hopes and visions for the future of St. Bede's in the Weeds? And if that congregation ever finds out I use them as an example so much, they're going to be upset with me, by the way. You ask those 2 questions, you'll get all the response you need. You don't have to ask negative questions when you're surveying. So now we've got 2 compare and contrast, right? We've got an internal leadership assessment, we've got a full congregation assessment, and we can see where leadership and the congregation are in perspective or in different perspectives with one another. The third listening is external. Go and interview 12, 10, 15 people in your greater community. The police chief, the fire chief, the head of the Economic Development Council, the mayor, the superintendent of schools, the principal of the school next door, the neighboring church's leadership, lay or clergy. Get outside of yourself and meet these people. And we're not inventing this process. LEAD has done this for years. There's a number of programs that encourage this. But the reason that you do this is because 30 years ago, the leaders of our community were in our churches. And today they're not. And so churches don't know us. The communities don't know us as churches. We think they do, and this is challenging. And every time I go somewhere, they're like, no, we are the church. We are known, right? So, and it doesn't matter if it's big town or small town. So, Emmanuel's Lutheran Church in Seguin, Texas. Seguin's a small town, less than 20,000 people. They have a square. Every Texas town has a square. And they are the square church, right? So they are the church in the middle of downtown. They've been there for 140 years. They're a big, huge stone building. I was working with them. On the way there, I stopped at 11 businesses within 1 mile of the church. And this is a lot harder today than it used to be. But I'd walk in and be like, hey, I'm really sorry, my phone just died, and I'm looking for Emmanuel's Lutheran Church. You know where Emmanuel's Lutheran Church is? 11 places. Nobody could tell me. Right now, I'm within 1 mile of the church. The biggest church in town, in the square, nobody can tell me where it is. Now, it's harder today because everyone's so nice, right? So he would be like, no, but let me look it up for you online. And I have to stand there while he looks it up for me online. Or, you want to borrow my charger for a minute? No, I'll be okay. Thanks. I'll find you. But nobody can tell me. We don't know these folks. We used to know these folks, but we don't know them anymore. And so these connections, you have to fight a couple things. One, when you go in, fight the urge to talk about your church. This isn't about you. That's the way they expect church to behave. They expect you to come in as marketers. Don't do that. Come in as listeners. So we ask questions like, some baseline questions to get them talking about you first so that they're comfortable. Do you know anything about St. Pete's and Louise? Ever been there? Ever been on the campus? No, great. Have you driven by the property? What do you think of the property? Is it attractive? Blah, 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 anything you can think of. And then tell us about your organization. What do you do? What are the greatest unmet needs in this community right now from your vantage point? How are faith communities engaging in those unmet needs in our community? And have this conversation of how you can help in the community without promises, but with listening. And undoubtedly what you'll hear, because it happens every single time, is no one's ever done this before. No church has ever come out and asked what the community needs before. And isn't it great now that we have a relationship? I don't do these for congregations, I do them with, because I want them to have the relationship at the end of the day. So that the pastor or the key lay person is going to be there. One great thing, St. Church, St. Philip in Littleton, I have the permission to tell these stories, by the way. They're in this conversation with the police chief, and just in casual conversation, as the meeting's wrapping up, the police chief goes, I just thought of this, but our guys have nowhere to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Like, they're out, they're on patrol, they got nowhere to go to the bathroom. They're all the way on the other side of town, and they're using the bathroom in some nasty gas station or something, and they just need a break. And would it be possible to use the restrooms at the church? So the church gave the police department the codes, and so now every night, multiple times a night, the police come in, use the restroom for a few minutes. They set up a coffee station for them, right? So the police can come in, hit the Keurig button, get a fresh cup of coffee, use the restroom. Well, what a gift to the police, first of all. Second of all, what are they getting? They're getting a police presence in their parking lot, right? All night long, in a safe way. And they're getting someone to tour their building all the time. And now every police officer in town knows where their church is, right? I mean, just little things like that where we're building relationships that mean people. All of these listenings, we're listening for 5 things. If you take nothing else from what I've said today, take this lens and put it on everything that you do in your church. This lens is the magic button, in my opinion, for how we manage change. I call these 5 keys to change management. Whether the change is big, small, planful, or responsive, we are looking for the 5 keys. Vision, skills, incentives, resources, and action plan. I'm going to take you through each one of these. But vision, where we're going, skills, do we have the right people at the table, incentives, do we have the why and why now, resources, are we funding it, shepherding it, and do we have a plan for how we're going to get here. By the way, you have permission to do this. It's in your favorite book of Habakkuk. I know you read it on the way over to the meeting this morning, but in Habakkuk, when we read, and the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tablets that he may run who readeth it, right, that reads it. And actually yesterday I put this up in the ECSW, and one of our pastors said, "Oh, that's my baptismal verse." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he pulls it up, and it's tattooed on his arm right here. I was like, "Oh, I didn't know Habakkuk was a real book." In that we talk about that process, the provolution curve. Here's I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong slides. Forgive me. In the vision, identity versus mission. Talked about it a little bit. Mission is what you're going to do in the world. In a second, I'm going to show you a slide that talks about good mission. But mission is a calling action. And I often get the question, don't we all have the same mission, right? Isn't the Great Commission what we're all about? Or don't we as Christians have the same thing? Well, certainly at some level we do, but no. You are uniquely called in your congregation. You are uniquely gifted. God has sent certain people to you to accomplish some part of this mission in ways that are different than others. And that is really critical to figure out what is unique and what you, as your congregation, are called to do in this greater sphere of Christian witness. Clear and common mission is the single most important thing to an organization that's growing. And I don't just mean having a mission statement that's on paper. I mean having a mission that we live and breathe and know, and that it flows from our mouths and we believe it, right? And we can make decisions with it in mission, and I'll say some more about that. Vision, on the other hand, is what the world's going to look like when you accomplish your mission. So when we think about this just in practical terms, vision is the sentence Mission is the sentence, vision is that half-page descriptor of a utopian future for this organization. We're leading things out. In that, consensus, and here's the key, doesn't equal motion. We have built this mythology in the church that everybody has to agree for us to do something, right? And the world is pushing us to that way, and it's not a Christian value. We value different perspectives, we value everybody at the table. It's not a value that we all have to 100% agree, right? And at the same time, at any given time in the life of the church, 20% of Lutherans are too grumpy. All right? It's a scientific fact. You can go to Pew Research Center and see it. No, that's not true. But 20% are just too grumpy. At the same time, 20% are too busy or too big or too involved to see the vision and the mission of what you're doing. They're not in and of your community right now. 20% are too small. Their scope of vision is too small to see the vision of the horizon. But 40% are willing to play at any given time. And if we can get that 40% to play, then we can roll the momentum of the organization in such a way that some of the too bigs and some of the too smalls and even some of the too grumpies will come along, and you'll have a super majority and you'll feel that momentum in the organization. If you wait until you have 100%, you won't go anywhere. And so we can't rely on this. My favorite story on this, a good friend of mine, her name's Catherine McLean. She was the internal person that led the rebranding for the Lance Armstrong Foundation. And a lot of people think of that with Lance's debacle, but it actually happened a couple of years before Lance's debacle. And Livestrong was a program of the Lance Armstrong Foundation, right? So it was one of their programs that they were running. They were going through this rebranding, and they went out and they did all this consumer research, and they paid groups to do research for them, and they came back with a 50% approval rating for Livestrong. Because back then we didn't talk about cancer like that, right? Back then we didn't say kick cancers like we do today. Back then people said, how can you talk about me like this? How can I live strong? I have cancer. And then half of the people said, yeah, that's what I want to do. I want to live strong. And so Lance Armstrong was so upset about this, he was like, what do we do? We only have 50% of the people that agree. Catherine, who had a career in this kind of work, said, 50%? We never get 50%, right? We run with this, absolutely. And it became one of the strongest brands in nonprofit history. So we often look for these things. Skills is the next piece of this. So we've got our vision in place, skills. Do we have the right people at the table? And by right people, I mean not just staff, but do we have the right staff? Do we have the right board or council? By the way, a lot of churches are using this term board now. So I interchange them. They mean the same thing to me. But board or council, do we have the right volunteers? Do we have the right outside resources at the table? Are we structured for this? A lot of times at church, what we try to do is we try to force new, well, I'm not going to say it the right way, we try to force new agendas into old structures, right? So we're going to not change anything, but we're going to do something new. And then we can't figure out why it didn't work, right, or didn't resource. There are times and places where things are important to change, and this is one of the places where we have to think about who and why we're recruiting. There's a lot to this, right? Because board recruitment, council recruitment is on here. And councils have different times in their lives where they need different things. There's a time when we need in the trusted voices in the community to be the great authenticators. There's times when we need the innovators in the community to come and bring some new life. There's times where we need the people that lead the way in giving to be on the council. There's times when we need the people that lead the way spiritually to be on the council. There are different times in the life of council, and we have to be thoughtful in the way we recruit those folks and not let it be a secondary effort. My favorite Sunday is somewhere in the middle of January or late November when I walk into the church and Evan's sitting back talking to Matt and he goes, look, it's not that bad. Right? That's the recruiting methodology for most of our councils. As opposed to what I just experienced last week. So I serve on the board of LIRS nationally, and we had our January meeting. We will elect new council members or new board members in our November meeting next year. We began the conversation last week, right? What are the gifts, skills, and traits we need on our board going forward for the coming year? And then we send out a survey. Who are the people we're thinking about doing this to? Then there's a recruiting process where we ask those people if they'll be willing to submit an application and they submit an application. Then there's an interview process, and then we get to this point where they're finally selected. Now, that seems arduous, right? I started getting invited to, I've been there for 5.5 years on the board now, but I started getting invited a year before that. By the time I was selected, it felt pretty important and pretty special, right? As opposed to something I'm doing out of obligation to my church. So do you need to do this for a year? No. But can you up the ante on it and make it more significant and increase your results? Yes. A lot of people are like, we got to make this easier, easier, and easier. When you do that, you tell somebody it's not valuable. The second thing you have to do here is you have to change your structures to have purpose and impact. We have so many structures that have no purpose and impact. If this committee hasn't done anything of value in 2 years, don't have it anymore. You're hurting your recruiting. If this council position hasn't done anything, why do we have this? My home church, Good Shepherd Lutheran Bastrop, a good Easter Sunday, I've told you, when everybody's in town, we have a few guests, there's like 50 people in church, right? And the council president came to me a couple of years ago and said, Evan, we don't have anyone to volunteer. And I said, well, hang on for a second. We have about 45 people in church on the regular. That was Easter at 50, right? That's about 15 families, give or take. You have 12 members of council. Council meets for 3 hours a month, every month. Heather and I are one couple because we have little kids. If you get one of us, you're not getting the other of us, right? So you're using all your volunteers. You just are using them all for council. So you have plenty of people volunteering. You're just using them for the wrong things. Right? So now, meanwhile, Bob, the guy who loves youth, right, shows up every day for the youth of our church. He is the representative for the youth for the council. So Bob comes to a council meeting. He spends his first 2 hours and 55 minutes listening to us read the minutes because nobody did before they came to the meeting, and then approving the financials, and then talking about the color of the carpet and doing all this. And we get to the end of 2 hours and 55 minutes. And Bob, would you quick before we leave? Would you give the report on the youth? And then Bob publicly has to say, well, I haven't had a chance to do anything. We haven't really done anything since the last time we met. Why? Because you used all 3 hours of Bob's volunteer time that could have been done on the youth at the council meeting. So, Governance is Ministry, Dan Hotchkiss, great book if you're looking for that in your recruiting. Reframing the Work of Nonprofit Leaders by Richard Chase, Governance as Leadership, or just a governance primer that we gave you long ago. We're also happy to do governance work with you on that.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
You said the second thing was the governance plan we gave you. That was the PowerPoint?
There's a word sheet in there that's just a governance primer that came at the very first meeting. And I can repost it in the base camp for you and let people sign. It's a one-pager, just a conversation starter for your councils to look at.
Okay.
Yeah, happy to. Or all of us do governance seminars as well. And if you want to do that as part of your SAS work, we're happy to do that via Zoom or in person if we're around.
So Evan, I'm sorry, what was the phrase you said, change structure for new purpose or whatever?
Yeah, thank you.
Just want to share that.
Yeah. So change structure for purpose. So historically in governance, we put a premium on perpetuity. Today we need to put a premium on purpose, right? And that's Richard Chait, that's not Evan Moylan. So perpetuity, we held offices and they had meaning in the community, right? I am the elder of the church, and I'm going to hold that job for X number of years. I am the chair of the congregation, believe it or not. A lot of our brothers and sisters in other denominations don't have any term limits, so a lot of their chairs will sit as chair for 20, 30 years, if you can imagine that, and it's this place of kind of prestige in the community. And we used to put a premium on those kinds of things. Today we put a premium on purpose, short-term, high impact. So we look to minimize the number of places where we need long-term volunteer engagement, and we increase the number of places where we have short-term, high-impact engagement. And I'll pick on Synods for a minute. Pretend like Matt's not here, though. I know he agrees.
Oh, no,
with
do
me.
it.
A Synod only has two legally required, constitutionally required committees. They are the Discipline Committee and the Consultation Committee. I served as Vice President for the Gulf Coast Synod for 8 years. There are 12 people on each of those committees. A third of them are elected every 2 years to a 6-year term. In the 8 years I served as VP, those two committees met this many times. But every 2 years, I found 8 people, because we had to run 2 people against each other, to serve or to sit for an election for a committee that would never meet because we don't utilize them that way. Now, discipline committee and consultation committee exist for the conflicts of our church. We still have conflicts in our church. Christ hasn't taken those away from us yet. But we don't deal with them the same way now. We have local resources to get to those with bishops and structures, and we just don't use them. You have those in your congregation too. You have things that are there just for the sake of having them in there. And you're using volunteer time just for the sake of having them there. So, in that, it leads nicely to this, which is incentives. So, are you clearly articulating the why now? What difference will it make? And remember that there's a typo on this slide. That should say exclamation point, not explanation point. But motivation is more than an exclamation point, right? So, what difference will it make, and why now in this, in your plan? I'm going to move a little quickly through a couple. In that why, this is really important. We used to think about change management as we used to go that way, now we're going that way. That's the wrong way to look at change. The right way to look at change is everything we're doing is built upon what came before us. That we're only where we are because of all the work that's gone into us beforehand. If you can frame change and motion and planning in this way, you'll get more buy-in from your community. Socrates said it this way: the secret of change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And that's a really, really critical element of this. Now, here's the big one: resource. Remember what the Bible says, just like we did in SAS? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, not the other way around, right? So 100 congregations, I hear them say, we want to grow. We want to grow. We want to reach out to our community. And I say, great, show me your budget. If your altar guild budget is bigger than your evangelism budget, you don't want to grow. Right? Just plain and simple. And this is a reorientation. This is a planning reorientation. It takes intention and it's hard. It's not easy. It's easy for me to say and leave the room. It's super hard because you have to let go of things that you're funding that have no value in your community. Churches all the time in SAS, they make these forward progresses towards great ministry initiatives that are going to make a difference in their life, and people see it and they know it and they believe it's going to work and they give more money to it, and then they get to the next year and they can't do it, what they said they were going to do, because, well, but we've got this budget over here that we're not meeting, and the budget, we're funding all sorts of things that aren't doing anything for the church. So this is critical, but it's hard, and it's a critical piece of this. So as you budget, think about these things. Are you informing and motivating? Are you budgeting to inform and motivate, to get people to come with you? Are you budgeting for collateral needs, hard, soft collateral, so paper, digital, signage, other things that are there? Are you budgeting for staff transition? That costs money along the way. Are you budgeting for any new skills needed, outside resources, inside resources, equipment, all those kinds of things, so that the change you're projecting in the strategic plan, and you have that lens on there, is thought through. Then, of course, you have to plan, which is what we're talking about. At the end of the day, you wind up with this strategic plan, which I'll show you another format of here shortly. But I want to say one more thing about this. I get this from congregations a lot. Actually, from all organizations. We're not planning because we want to be nimble, right? But nimble doesn't mean responsive, right? Nimble doesn't mean that you're blown anywhere the wind blows. Nimble means you can tack your ship if you're a sailor, right? If I want to go that way and the wind's blowing in my face, I go like this to get that way, right? If I want to go that way and I'm nimble, I just go this way, right? And so nimble doesn't mean responsive. Don't let that be an excuse for your planning in those places. Now, as you do this, if you have all 5 of those things in place while you're planning, you get the meaningful change that you're wanting, right? So we know where we're going, we've got the right people at the table, we've got the right incentives, we've got the right resources, and we've got the action plan, we get the change we want. If we're missing any of them, denoted by the white or the yellow that you see there, we get a different outcome. So if we've got the right people at the table, we've got the incentives, we've got the resources, we've got the plan, but we don't have any idea where we're going, right? We get a lot of confusion. And we get that kind of angst in the system from confusion. Likewise, if we have the vision, everybody knows where we need to go, we've got the why down, we've got it resourced, we've got a plan, but we don't have the right people at the table, and my personal experience is this is the one that hampers us as church the most. We get a lot of anxiety in the system, right? So we feel it because we all feel the pressure of what needs to be done, but we just don't have the skills at the table to do it because we either don't have the right volunteers or we don't have the right staff or the right system. We feel that a lot. If you don't have an incentive, you'll get the change, but it'll be really slow, gradual change. If you don't have the right resources, then we all get frustrated. We all know why, we got the right people at the table, we got a plan, we haven't paid for it, and we all get frustrated. And then, if you don't have a plan, you get a lot of false starts. This is kind of like up here with the confusion with the vision, because they go hand in hand. What's wrong with false starts? How many do you get in the Olympics before you're DQ'd? One, right? The second one, you're DQ'd. Why? Because my false start wastes the other runner's energy. And in the church, we only have so much human capital. It's the #1 resource that we have. And so every time we false start, we take the trust away from all the other runners. And we're all sitting in the blocks wondering what we're going to do next, right? And so false starts and planning can help avoid those false starts. I'm going to take about another 10 minutes and then we'll take a break. Thanks for bearing with me here. So, mission's what you're going to do in the world. Vision's what the world's going to look like when you accomplish your mission. Here's your test. What's the mission of your organization? Not knowing your mission is like getting in your car in the morning and going, I wonder where I'm going. Some days you end up someplace really cool. Some days you end up someplace where you lock the doors. Right? The problem with both of those things is you use the same amount of gas. Knowing your mission in clear and commonly defined mission is really, really critical for this. Let me share an example with you. Luther Hill, the camp that I was sharing with you about, we went through this process and we arrived at a mission to be a place for all people of every generation to experience the love of Christ in unique settings and meetings. Now, we weren't being redundant when we said all people of every generation. We were intentionally saying that faith is passed best when it's passed from generation to generation, and we want everybody to have the opportunity, regardless of race, creed, color, financial, or familial status, to have the opportunity to be at camp, because we believe when you hear the gospel under the oak trees of Central Texas, from your peers, your pastors, your children, your friends, it's like hearing it for the first time, and it changes. You know exactly who I am and what I'm doing in 30 seconds from that organization, from the mission to Stump Street, but more importantly, governance could use it to make decisions. Great mission allows governance to make good decisions. So about 3 years after I left the camp, my brother chose to get married there. We had built this chapel, highest point in the county, 695 feet above sea level. It's unbelievable. That's a joke too. The chapel looked out on the west, sun setting, and I went down to the dining hall because that's what former camp directors do. We help ourselves to things. And I went to the ice machine, and I walked in. I opened the door of the dining hall, and there were 150 young Muslims in the dining hall. And I was just, wasn't who I expected to see, right? So I walked in. First of all, I'm struck by the fact that obviously they're Muslim, their dress appears that, they are different than what we normally see at our Lutheran camping communities for what their race makeup looks like, what their age looked like, because they were all in their 20s. And it caught me off guard. I said good morning, and we got the ice, came back out, said sorry for interrupting, went out and saw the director of the camp. I said, Matt, what group was that? He said, oh, that's the Muslim Student Association from the University of Houston. 2 weeks ago, the camp that they had been booked at for a year found out who they were and told them they weren't welcome. They called us, and we said, of course you're welcome, because you'll experience the love of Christ through our hospitality and through our sense of welcome to you and your community. Their mission allowed them to make that choice without taking a moment to pause or to think about it or to engage the board. It became a non-question because of that. Likewise, that mission called us in our building. If we're going to be a place for all people, we've got to build buildings with accessible buildings. If we're a place for all people, we've got to build buildings that people of all ages use. If we're a place for all people, we're going to design programs in this way or that way. It's the central rallying cry. It's not just words on paper. So what's the mission of the ELCA? What's that?
God's work our hands.
No, but I'm so glad you said it. Don't feel bad I set you up. God's work our hands is perhaps the most successful tagline in the history of the Protestant church in the United States. Right? It is phenomenal, but it is also a lesson in communication. So God's work our hands started to get some traction. And it went on for years, about 7 years, I think, if I've got my history correct. And then we got to the Churchwide Assembly, 2013, where they launched the capital campaign for the ELCA called Always Being Made New. And they tried to migrate from God's work our hands to always being made new. Not necessarily intentionally, but that migration started to happen. And it was like a ton of bricks, right? It didn't catch on. And they've gone back to God's work our hands, all here. Now, if you notice, we've gotten a t-shirt in the last 4 years, it says always being new right here, right? But it still says God's work our hands right here. And I say that a lot of my friends are there. I have high respect for the work they did in that. But it's a communications thing, right? As leaders, we're like, oh my gosh, if I hear God's work in my hands one more time, I'm going to vomit in my mouth, right? But then out here, the person in the pew is just getting it, right? And just catching on to it. Nike hasn't changed just do it in a long time, right? Also notice that's an interesting example, because notice what Nike sells in their commercials. They don't sell shoes, they sell athletes, right? And the idea of athlete. They're not saying buy our shoes, they're great. They're saying great athletes use our shoes, right? It's a totally different thing. So same thing, God's work our hands. We're not saying, well, this is what we're going to do, this is who we are. It's a meaningful slogan. The mission of the ELCA is marked with the cross of Christ forever. We are claimed, gathered, and sent for the sake of the Lord.
Say it again.
Marked with the cross of Christ forever. We are claimed, gathered, and sent for the sake of the Lord.
I'll remember God's work our hands.
What's that?
I will remember God's work our hands.
Exactly.
All of that, I won't remember.
Exactly. And what these two things do is they give us, or what something great like God's work our hands does, is it gives the community a handle to hold on to and to own. Right? I can tell you about my church. I can invite you to this. And when I come to church, I know what we're about. And so we see this in a couple different ways. I'm going to give you just the quick elements here. One is mission is what you're going to do in the world. It's short because of the exact reason she just stated. It's easily understood. Don't put your church jargon in it. It should be recited by memory. It should be big enough to inspire. And it should be small enough to know when we make some progress towards it. It's a BHAG out there, but it's not crazy. And it's not hidden with our church lingo all the time. We use it not to describe the organization or define the results, but to inspire us to go forward. It's a script for board governance, and most critically, it should be used always and everywhere. If you have missional language or tagline that you can't use, it doesn't flow from your mouth, it doesn't work, it's time to change it. You've got to be able to own it and to speak it at all levels of leadership. So you start with some questions. I'll leave these in the slide so you can come back to them when we post it up. Who do we serve? What need do we meet in the world? Here's some other examples that I shared. I shared this one with you here. This is a social service agency. When we went through the process with them, they literally sold off all of their senior living facility. They went through this, arrived at this new mission before their wow, this is one of my favorite stories. Before their mission had been to provide help, healing, and hope in the name of Jesus Christ. Seems like a lovely mission, right? Except, ask me to do something, right? Ask me to do something. Ask me to do something. How do I say no to anything? I'm providing help, healing, and hope in the name of Jesus Christ. That's a pretty broad spectrum. And so they had foster care, and they had unaccompanied minors, and they had senior living, and they had this, and they had that, and they had this, and they had 30 locations and 1,000 staff, and nobody knew what anybody was doing, and nobody cared about the organization. They had a 40% turnover rate on a staff of 1,000. So they couldn't accomplish anything because they're hiring 400 people a year, right, to be part of the social service. So they come through this, they put all their eggs in breaking the cycle of child abuse. To do that, they sold off their senior living facilities, erased their debt, put money into endowment. They were no longer dependent upon the state, so they could actually be an advocate for kids and not be worried about losing their contracts. All of that happens through a missional change. Here's a congregation. This is a congregation in, actually in Colorado as well. This is Louisville, Colorado, Louisville, Colorado. To be a grace-filled, welcoming community that strives to renew in worship and learning, relate to God's people, respond to needs outside our walls. They use renew, relate, and respond as their tagline. And the Fuller mission is their governance and their internal mission. Renew, relate, and respond also becomes the way they communicate everything. So if you go to their church or go to their website, You will see, these are the ways we're renewing this week, these are the ways we're responding this week, these are the ways we're relating this week. It's even over the urinals in the men's room. I did not check the ladies' room. Core values are the absolutes. These are the what will we always, what will we never do. I call them the bumpers on the sides of the bowling lane. If you're outside of your core values, you are not who you said you're going to be, right? And so this is critical to knowing your organization. And you can get at these by asking in a group dynamic a couple questions. What will we always, what will we never do? But look at the hard words here. Always and never, right? When you really press those words, what do you get to? You get to the core of things, but it's hard to answer those. So I often get, by the way, it's the exact same question. It's just I frame it both ways for the 20% of Lutherans who are too grumpy at any given time. Because we'll ask this question, what will we always, what will we never? 80% of the people will say, we'll be Christ-centered, right? Or we'll be solo scriptura, or whatever they're going to say in that way. And then 20% of the people say, we'll never worship the devil. It's the same answer, right? It's just the way we frame the question. And so we get there. But what are the always? Very rarely is anything stylistic going to be in your always or never, right? Very rarely are you going to be stylistic. Unless it's really core to your identity and really sets you apart. And that's a real challenge. And uniqueness is a critical part of mission. A lot of times our missional language struggles to be unique to us. It can happen in core values if it can't happen in mission. To know who you are. Yeah.
Do you find though that some of the core values are being, when people say we're going to love people, or unless you're, are they being stretched by political division right now? I mean, because we'll say, you know, do what Jesus did, but then, well, not if you're illegal, not if you're this, not if you're that.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that it can sound nice, but when you get down to the what will we never do, there's a real split on what that really means.
Yeah, I really can't say it better. Living these out's a lot harder than writing them on paper. Getting to the, you're exactly right.
Preaching's really hard.
Yeah. And getting the community behind them and having discussion helps some of that. So this is an exercise I would actually do in the room in that leadership day. I would actually ask this question to small group tables and let them wrestle with it. And then I point out where did they struggle. So I say, you know, on this one, instead of just reporting back what you wrote, I'd say, what did you come across that was hard to debate? What were you debating? And undoubtedly someone will say welcome. It's usually not around immigration, but it's usually around, well, safety for our kids, right? If a child molester ever came in the room, would we be welcoming to them? They go all the way to the ad absurdum, right, to argue the point. And they have these hard conversations and they talk about welcome, and then they come to the point and say, well, our value is to welcome everybody, but we may not practice it in certain ways, or we may have to be forced to practice it in certain ways, but at least they get to wrestle with it in the room. You know, the same is true, worship style always comes up in this one. You know, and some congregations, I'd say 10% of them are truly worship style is a core value to them, right? But 90% of congregations, it's a preference and not a core value. So there are churches, in fact, I'm going to show you an example that has one. So this, I always share this, there's a lot of ways to write core values. You can write them with words, you can write them with phrases, you can write them in paragraphs, other things. But this one, they had a marketing person on their team, right? So they forced themselves into alliteration. But we're a community which values worshiping, rooted in the Lutheran tradition, and centered on word and sacrament. We celebrate its modern expression. That's what I was talking about. They really were a modern church. Now these guys are like, 15 minutes from Boulder. Half the congregation's a PhD. They're young. They're super young comparatively to the rest of the church. Welcoming, striving to welcome all for who they are. Wondering, valuing education, encouraging, faithful, questioning. That's that PhD thing, right? Working, committed to our neighbors, and expressing that through commitment and service. And then they're a party church. Like a lot of us think we're party church. These guys are party church, right? And they couldn't come up with a word that like talked about how much they socialize and come together. And I was being really flippant in the meeting because I'm not really a wordsmithing kind of guy. And I said, well, what you're talking about is sailing, right? And they said, yeah, that's it. And so they threw it in here, and it lasted for about 2 weeks till they realized they couldn't do it publicly. But I'll do it publicly forever because I think it's great. So they changed it, the gathering for celebration.
Totally is.
This how our core values used. they're not, your mission's on everything. It's on every statement, it's on every document, or your tagline. And you're using it in governance, you're using it in decision-making, all of that. Core values are used in decision-making, and they live in places like your website and on central places in your community, on walls or other things where people can find you. They're used in your new member orientation. They're used in a way that we center ourselves around that one. Coming to action planning, and I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on this because most people get this side of it, but we tear this down so we can tell the story differently to different groups, and so that we can organize our work. You get what you inspect, not what you expect, right? Where you put your energy, where you put your intention, where you put your inspection is where you get your results. Where you put your expectation, not so much. So here, ministry result areas or key result areas, there's usually 3 to 5. These are typically thematic titles that give us columns or give us rows in which to organize the work to talk about. So it might be, talking about our outreach to the community, our resourcing our ministries, and our preparing our facility for the future, right? They're titles to hold things onto. Underneath there, you typically have 7 to 10 goals. Not a magic number. You can have 11, you can have 3. But you can't inspect everything all the time. So that's why we limit these things down. The goals are the next set of rocks down that begin to be measurable. So if preparing our facilities for the future of our ministry is there, then one of our goals might be completing a site master plan for the next 20 years for St. Bede's and the Weeds, right? Over here on resourcing our ministry, one of the goals might be preparing for a capital campaign in our community. They're coming across in this way, but they're down. Then we have objectives. Underneath each goal, there might be an unlimited number of objectives. So in this case, preparing our facilities for the future, create a site master plan for St. Bede's and the Weeds. Objective might be get RFPs out to architects by October 30th, 2020. Interview architectural firms November 2020. Select at council an architectural firm December 2020. And we take this all the way down to the very granular. And they all have the by who, the by when, cost, all that sort of stuff. You can take this down to as detailed as you want. And when you're planning, you typically take a strategic planning team to get through identity, ministry result areas, through all the listing, because they're the people that have done all the listing and put it all into the right piles. And they've captured perhaps some of the goals that are going to come in here, but they don't have to write the whole plan. It's different depending on the community. So if you're a large church with a large staff, the strategic planning team, which will involve some staff but not all, might get to this point, go test it with everybody. Okay, we're on the right track. Now we're going to hand out these areas for the staff to create the objective tactical level, because you don't want a strategic planning team to tell the staff that on Tuesday, December 12th, you're going to do this, right? They're going to come up with those things themselves. If you're a smaller church, this might go out to committees at that point. If you're a really small church, this might come back to council at that point to do some of that kind of objective tactical level stuff. In the end, what we're aiming for is a couple things. One is a public version of this plan. So this, you can imagine, is an 8.5 by 11 pamphlet, so it folds in half down the center line. Here's the cover. Here's the back side. This is what we would call the public version of your plan. This one in particular is for Lutheran Outdoor Ministries, the National Association of all the ELCA camps. So you have camps like Lutherdale or like Crossways, thank you, that have their camps here in the state, right? There's about 144 camps nationally, about 100 agencies. They come together nationally as LOM. This is the organization that they're in association with. In the plan, then this is the public version of the plan that went to all their membership. I realize this is deadly on your screen right now with the lights. Over here, this is identity. So what you're seeing over here is mission, core values. They had an existing vision they didn't want to change, so I don't endorse this vision, but it's there. And then they have their core values here in a nice font that's there. Then over here, you have your ministry result areas. So you have 3 ministry result areas and the core goals that they have. Notice there's no objectives or tacticals on these things, right? This is a public version. Your public doesn't need to see how you're going to tie your shoes in the morning. They just need you to show up with your shoes on, right? So this is the public version of the plan. If you take your public into, and by public I mean your wider constituency that's out here on the circle, if you take them into the nitty-gritty details, under this idea that you're being transparent, you're causing more damage than good. Forced transparency, right? You're forcing it on them. Being transparent is honestly and openly answering any question that comes to you, making it available for everybody. I am not saying be secretive. Don't hear be secretive. But don't have verbal diarrhea either, right? And you give people so much detail out of context that it hurts their ability to engage and buy into it because they don't care about that level of detail and they shut down. So your public version of the plan is different from your internal version of the plan. And that's the great mythology of the church, right? That we all have to agree, that we all have to know everything all the time in this dues-paying membership organization. Here is the internal version, and this is where I said, the world's full of great 60-page strategic plans. I don't use that. For me, internally, I use an Excel matrix, and I can put this up there for you. I've got 5, or in this case 3 MRAs on different tabs down there. This is MRA 1. You've got an MRA here. You've got the goal. Underneath the goal, this is in gray, which you can't really see on the screen. You've got objectives in white. So goal 1, objective 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. That might go through 1ZZZ. You've got a metric, so how are we going to know it's accomplished? You've got sub-objectives if there's smaller things you need to think about. Who's the champion? Champion doesn't have to do it, but they have to make sure it gets done. The champion can't be all council and pastor, right? There has to be more thought than that. Cost, you also have to think about where the cost is going to come from. This particular slide, I took this information out because it feels a little confidential to them. But the cost, where are we going to fund this from? Where's it going to come from? Is it going to come from the annual fund? Is it going to come from a special appeal, from a capital campaign, from our endowment? Where's that going to come from? And then who's the timeline? Fight the desire to have everything timed in the next 30 days. When you get to using this plan then, your staff uses it every day. Again, this differs depending on the size of the congregation and what your structures are. But if you're an organization with some staff, you're going to be into it every day because you're going to have areas that are assigned to you. By every day, I mean you're just paying attention to it. If you're a nonprofit, you're reporting to the board quarterly. Whoever's reporting is going to bring this in a report format. At a church, the council needs to be aware of it every month, and it will set agenda for the council every month, but you don't necessarily need to report on it every month. But once a quarter, I would use it to report. Anything in green, we don't need to worry about it. That's just my signal to governance. Everything's on track. Even if it's not started yet, everything's on track for this. Yellow is, hey, something's going on with the timeline of this or with the movement of this. I want to report to you about it when we come together as a board. Red is, there's a critical decision we as a board need to make. And so these things are going to lead our agenda. Not necessarily bad, but I'm telling you now's the time where we have to make some decisions on this, and we need to put this on there. Imagine what council would be like if you took all the mundane stuff, put it into a consent agenda, voted on that, right? Now your financials can't go into consent agenda. And then the meat of the meeting was a strategic and generative conversation around the most important things in the life of conversation for the next 3 months or whatever, right? And the forecast out of the future. How much energy would you find in that versus the other way around? How we do this? So that's what this does when you get a good one into place and you can put them all together. Just 2 more things on this, then I'm going to give us a quick break, and then I'm going to jump into the special interest stuff. Everything can be measured, and it should be measured. We're so afraid of measurement in the church. Don't be afraid of measurement. Measurement's not a chain, it's a tool to celebrate. If you never measure anything, you never know when you've been successful. And success breeds success, and momentum breeds momentum. And when we measure, we tell people that we're doing well together. So how do we put measurement into place? People say, well, Evan, you can't measure faith. No, I don't have a faith-o-meter. I can't point it at you, laser point you, and know how strong your faith is. But I can measure the marks of discipleship, right? Are we praying? Are we worshiping? Are we studying? Are we being generous? I can measure these sub things. So sometimes we have to measure some things, but find a way to measure everything you're doing. If you can't find a way to measure it, it probably isn't something you're doing, or shouldn't be something you're doing. Or if it doesn't have a secondary measurement to at least show you progress along the way. Because nothing inspires energy like a win, right? Buy-in versus approval, we've already talked about this. Strategic planning is all about the front processes. It's not about the plan at the end. It's kind of like SAS when we say go do the focus groups, go talk to people, do that sort of thing. Buy-in is easier than permission. So when you engage people at the front, you get their input and it shapes the plan. So as many ways as you can engage people. When you test the plan in the middle, I haven't talked a lot about testing, but somewhere in the middle of your planning, you're going to go back to leadership, go back to that leadership day, say here's what we've heard, here's the process so far, here's what we've created so far, and you're going to ask questions like, does this represent, say, beads in the weeds? You're not going to ask this question. Never ask this question. Do you like it? That is a bad question to ask because everyone's got an opinion. There are people that don't like pizza. There are people that don't like ice cream, right?
Communists.
What's that?
They're called communists.
Yes. If there are people that don't like those things, there will be people that don't like your new mission statement, right? So that's not the question to ask. The question to ask is, does this represent us? Does this move? But as you're testing these things and you're going back, you're getting buy-in. You're getting people to come along with you. Who approves the strategic plan? The church council. It's the church council approves. This doesn't go back to the congregation for approval. You engage the congregation at the beginning. You bring the congregation through the process with input. You keep them informed along the way. But a congregation does not approve a strategic plan. It would be inappropriate. First of all, your Constitution gives the council authority to do so. You can go read your Constitutions tonight. I don't know, you keep it beside your bed. But read your Constitution. It gives you the authority. It says from time to time, the council may, and it tells you you can do a strategic plan. Visioning. The second thing is your congregation hasn't been through the whole effort with you. That's why they can't approve it. It's just like when we have an annual meeting of a body that is a different body every time it meets annually. They don't approve the minutes from the last meeting because they weren't there, right? Same is true of your congregation. Nothing wrong with your congregation's input. Get as much input into the process as possible and communicate back your work as much as possible. But don't go to people that weren't in the process and ask them to approve what's there, right? Because they haven't taken all the time. You are the called and elected leaders of the organization. They've called you to do this, so you get the authority to approve this in that way. All right, talked about the public meeting versus the planning tool, so we're good there. Any questions? I know that's a lot of content in an hour and 35 minutes. Any questions on any of that? No?
With handouts or is this slideshow available or anything like that?
I'll put it all into Basecamp for you with today's meeting date. And along with this, I'll put a blank copy of that Excel sheet. And I'll put two things in there. It'll say Manual 1, Manual 2. They're sample manuals for doing this work on your own, both in action, or excuse me, in identity and action plan.
And if that's something you want to talk more about, that's a significant area of passion for me and why I feel called to this work. Also, the video that's being recorded will be available to be able to share with other leaders who are not here. Obviously, we only request that you keep it within your congregation. But if you want to talk more about this, reach out. I'm also going to post a great shared spreadsheet tool if you have any interest in that kind of goal setting with a staff or with the council.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Share that.
Yeah, we're excited. Good.
I've gone over my time. I want to take a read on the room. I know some folks may need to take a break. Are we at an okay place where you can self-regulate your breaks, or do we need to take a formal 3 to 5 minutes to get here? Are we good if I keep going? All right, no one's revolting, not too bad. It won't hurt my feelings if you have to self-regulate a little bit. Thank you for letting me go over. I apologize for my poor command of the time. Let's take 3 minutes. 1:40. I'm sure Mike is nicer than I am. I caused a little confusion with an early comment, and I just want to clarify. Thank you for the questions. The process of defining ministry initiatives and the process of gathering your community together to make those decisions is still a part of your ongoing work in SAS. But our hope is that eventually those decisions will be tied to a longer-term plan rather than a year by year. So if you don't have a strategic plan in place now, then you would do that same process again, hopefully with a little more advanced notice, so you get ahead of the game a little more in determining ministry initiatives. And one of your ministry initiatives might be planning for the future or whatever it is, right, to get a long-term plan in there. However, you take this on. If you have an existing plan, or you will before you get to that point in ministry, then what we're doing is pulling pieces out of that plan, and instead of getting people's input on what should we do, we're motivating and informing people on what we are going to do. So it just changed a little bit, so that's the thing. In that, when we talk about stewardship, remember, this is not a one and done. You didn't buy a stewardship process from a box off the shelf, pull it down and run it in October and you're done, right? We're talking about changing culture in the life of a congregation. Culture change doesn't happen overnight. It's not just the keto diet. We want to get all of this stuff into place long term. As such, you have all sorts of things that are used throughout the year. I decided to use the lightest slide I could so that you would not be able to see it. But this is all coming out of your book. Don't reference the page numbers. I'm using an existing PDF, not from the new book. But they're in your book. This is a month-to-month thing, right? So your annual appeal, your Bible studies, your reports and your reminders, your newsletter, your special gifts, your sermons, your new member stuff, your new donors or visitors, your cause of the month, which is just our terminology for the other partner church ministries that we support. This says Trinity Stories, which was generosity stories. Remember that tool we showed you to use if you're doing generosity stories in the life of your congregation. The point of this is all year, right? So right now in the life of your congregation, you've got tools at your disposal. The monthly communications tool that we provide at the end of the year in Basecamp of like, here are stories that you can use month to month in your newsletters on different ways to give, on deferred giving, on charitable IRA rollover, qualified distributions, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is just available. Push it in and out. Make it be yourself. Make sure you're taking time to talk about generosity at other times of year when you're not asking for money. If you only talk about generosity when you're asking for money, you're not talking about generosity. You're talking about asking for money. So we want to take those things. By the way, just while we have you together, because I'm getting a lot of questions on it this month, the charitable IRA rollover, some people call it, it's technically called the qualified charitable distribution. We talked about that when I was with you in the fall, the fact that people can, at 70.5, make a qualified charitable distribution from their IRA that doesn't count as income for them up to $100,000 to a charity or a group of charities. Some of the rules seem to have changed about that over the last couple of weeks. I want to give you a little clarity. They did not actually change when you can do a qualified charitable distribution. You can still do that at 70.5. What they changed was when you have to start taking distributions from your IRA, which is now 72. So you don't have to take a distribution until you're 72 years old, but you can still do your qualified distributions at 70.5 if you want to for charitable pieces, and your grandfathered in if you're anywhere in between those two spaces where you can continue to do this. So you might get that question, so I'm sure that, did I get that right? All right.
Sounds right.
Yeah, all right. That page is what we just talked about.
Well, one of the ideas I came up with some of our brainstorming, I don't know if you talked about this, but was especially people that are new to the distribution, the required, was the idea of encouraging them possibly to use that towards something new, which would be life insurance, and then getting that right off as well. So it kind of becomes two things. They're using that money to now purchase a plan for the church and do it that way. So I don't know.
That's a great idea.
Thank you.
It's a great idea. However, their required minimum distribution is still taxable for them if they take it and then take a life insurance policy as a deferred gift. But there's another way to do life insurance, which is to do a charitable life insurance policy. So they could take their qualified charitable distribution, give it to the church without restriction,
Right.
and then the church could purchase a life insurance plan in their name with their permission. The church would be the sole beneficiary of for a period of time, or they could do a donation annually for the premium. Charities do this all the time. So charities often take a charitable life insurance policy with a donor's permission. I can't take a policy on you without your permission. But a donor would come to me and say, Evan, I want to do a $100,000 policy for when I die for the charity. I will pay you, I'll make a donation to cover the premium every year. And, you know, I get a check every year for whatever it is, $2,000 from the donor, and we have that. And yeah, it's very common.
I was told by a financial planner, one of the other ways is as long as they cannot change the beneficiary.
That's correct.
So,
That's correct.
so it has to be towards the church. As long as it's not, they can reverse it and say, no, I'm going to give this to my children now instead. As long as they can't reverse it, there's a way of doing that. Then as long as that's done, then it could still be.
Where they roll directly from the
Yes.
qualified charitable directly into life.
Yes, I'm not a financial planner. I don't even
I'm
play
not
one on
either.
TV.
That's
But that's what I was told.
No, have to look into it for you.
As long as it's not reversible.
Yeah. So special appeals, another great place for qualified charitable distributions. Special appeals, and I'm just going to scrap using this because I realize it's not working in the room. We encourage congregations to do a special appeal every year if they're not doing a capital campaign or if there's no struggle or controversy going on in the congregation, right? A special appeal is 3 to 4% of annual operating budget, typically. So we have special appeal 3 to 4%. We have capital campaign, which doesn't, a lot of people are going to tell you it follows a hard and fast rule. Like a capital campaign can be 1 to 2 times annual operating budget. That's a rule of thumb, it's not a hard and fast rule. I can show you congregations that had to do a capital campaign for 75% of their annual operating budget. I can show you congregations that successfully did a 5 times annual operating budget. There's so many factors that go into that don't follow a hard and fast rule. Talk to somebody who can help you think through it. But regardless, starting at one time, between 1 time and 4%, there's a huge gap there, right? That's a gap where we make decisions. So sometimes those things are major special appeals, sometimes those things are small capital campaigns, sometimes we hold those things in a capital campaign. But the difference between a special appeal and a capital campaign is a special appeal is typically focused on a one-time above and beyond gift from a donor on top of their annual fund plan. Whereas a capital campaign is focused on a multi-year pledge above and beyond annual fund giving for a special purpose that typically either builds, renovates, or reverses debt on something in that way. A special appeal, on the other hand, is usually based on a project that the church needs or that will impact the church where there's a high level of tangibility. As soon as this is done, we all feel it, we touch it, we see it makes a difference in the life of the church. And what this does, if you go back to the first pages of your book, there's that pyramid like this, right? And donors, all donors come in through a first-time experience, they make a first-time gift, that gift becomes a repetitive gift, that repetitive gift grows into an intentional gift where they're giving under a statement of intent, or a tither, if you will, and then it grows into that sacrificial gift, and then it grows into the deferred gift. That sacrificial gift, there's someone in your congregation right now ready to make a gift like that. And if you don't give them an opportunity to do that, they won't just give it to the annual fund. Gifts match the size of the opportunity. Your annual fund opportunity is only this big. Gifts happen when opportunity meets passion. So if the opportunity is only this big, the gift will only be this big, regardless of how loud you talk about it. So you can scream about your annual fund in the budget, and the gifts will not get any bigger. But if the opportunity gets bigger, the gifts will get bigger. This is how all the time we see gifts that nobody knows is out there to bigger opportunities. A congregation in Fort Collins, Colorado this year got $1 million gift to a capital campaign from one individual. That individual had never given more than $10,000 a year to the congregation. Gave $1 million gift. There's all sorts of reasonings behind that, right? So, having a special appeal, 3 to 4%, allows you to strategically take things out of your annual budget and get them accomplished in the 3 to 4% range. So, if you're a congregation of $450,000, we're approaching up at $20,000, right? Somewhere in that realm. What we're worried about, or what people are often worried about, is donor fatigue, right? Oh, we can't talk to people about money all the time. We're not doing that. Don't hear that. This is not about that. Remember, we're talking about generosity year-round. This is typically off-cycle from your annual fund. Sometimes it has to go, but it's usually off-cycle with your annual fund, so June, May, what have you. And it's a different set of donors every time you have a special appeal before you go to the congregation. So what has hurt congregations in the past is having 1 to a half dozen of the safety nets, right? Matt, we're out of money again. Would you and Barb potentially put in another, $10,000 this year? Donors get sick of that. They get sick of being the safety net, right? This is different. This year, we're focused on sending the kids to the National Youth Gathering. I know that Matt and his wife have a passion for getting kids to the youth gathering. I'm going to go and ask them, it's going to cost us $20,000. I'm going to go and ask them for a challenge gift of $10,000 that they can challenge the congregation to come back and raise the other $10,000. Or I'm going to ask them for a challenge gift, and I'm going to ask 2 other families, and I'm going to come back to the congregation, and I'm going to say, sending the kids to youth gathering costs $20,000. The great news is we already have $15,000 in hand, and now you're invited to prayerfully consider a way to give above and beyond to this effort. Next year, it's about the boiler, right? And you're thinking about who to talk to. You're not going to come talk to me. We don't have boilers in Texas. We call that the outdoors. But you're going to come to me and you're going to talk to me about the air conditioner, and you're going to say, Evan's a guy that understands the practicalities of the church. He and his wife expressed to me that if there's ever anything we need to do to the church, they'd be open to that. You're going to ask me to do that. The mistakes that people make in a special appeal that cause damage are what I call the y'all give, right? The y'all give is the dues-paying mentality of church. Hey y'all, and I'm going to be Texas with you for a minute because it works in my example. The roof has a hole in it, right? If everybody just gives $100, we'll get this thing taken care of. That kind of speech leads to donor fatigue because there is always something. And I don't get to be part of the success, I get to be part of the problem, right? The other way to come at this is, hey y'all, there's a hole in the roof, but the great news is we're 80% of the way there already. A small group of committed individuals have already given 80% of this, and now's our opportunity as a congregation to knock this thing out and get it taken care of. And we invite people individually to make gifts to this. There's a whole process in your book around this that you can go back into and you can look at for how to do it. It's not dissimilar to the SAS processes for fall annual fund stewardship. However, a couple little nuances. One of them is the other mistake that people make in an annual appeal in a special appeal is not getting enough people involved. Okay? So involvement leads to investment. And so by building a little committee around this, by getting some people to focus on informing and motivating, by doing a project around the generosity stories, by doing something around creating some materials to this in your program, by putting a few weeks together to inform and motivate the congregation, a special event together, you get involvement that will lead to the giving. So that's one thing. The other thing is you want to give everybody an opportunity to give, even though we're going to try to get some momentum from the early on. The reason for that is we never know where that $1 million gift is going to come from, right? Someone could be really passionate about this and want an opportunity to be a part of this, and we want to give them an opportunity. There's a lot of great outcomes. A yes is a great outcome, a no is a great outcome, a see me later is a great outcome. The only bad outcome is, I would have given to that if I'd known about it, right? So we don't want to keep it secret, but we want to balance the y'all give versus the secret giving society, right? So we're in between those two things. As you do that, the messaging is a little bit different on this. So one of the other things to consider is donating to the PowerPoint class for Evan Moylan. Here's a gift chart that's a little bit different to this. There's a step-by-step guide in there, but this gift chart is a little bit different. We call this a standard of gifts chart, and this one's even more different. But what a standard of gifts chart is it shows the gifts that are necessary to get to the goal. So in a special appeal, or even in a capital campaign, when we have a goal, this goal is $22,000. The lead gift, the top gift, is typically 10 to 15% of the annual of the total, right? So in this case, we need one gift of $2,000, right? One gift, $2,000. And this one, 3 gifts of $1,000, 5 gifts of $500, 10 gifts of $300, etc. As we break down this chart, it follows the 80-20 rule. 80% of the funding is going to come from 20% of the people. 20% of the funding is going to come from the remainder of the congregation in that way. But we get to inspire others into it. Now, this parenthetical thing, and this particular example that's in the book, this congregation used cubits. Remember the cubits? That's how we measured the size of the ark, right? And so they sold cubits. And they sold cubits as their acknowledgement process, and in their narthex, they had cubits, right, that were marked out, and they got colored in and filled in. I'm sure they weren't full cubits, because a cubit's a pretty big measurement, but they had these representation of cubits. Had to be big to fit all those animals, right? Anyway, they had these representational cubits, and you could buy cubits, right? So they needed 2,200 cubits, and here's how we filled in the cubits, and they did this. So that points to a couple other things about special appeals. One is we have to find some way to celebrate them and mark the progress for them. This is when you go to the March of Dimes and they've got the thermometer up, right, and the thermometer's rolling up in that way, shows people progress as to where we are. The thermometer never goes public when it's at 0, right? The thermometer goes public after you've done the silent phase of the campaign, and you're coming in with 60, 70, 80% of the campaign, so that when people see it for the first time, they're already halfway up that oscillation, right, on the growth of the organization. The second thing is, different from annual fund gifts, which we thank quarterly and in person and through other things, a special appeal gift or a capital campaign gift gets thanked as soon as it's received. So if you get a check for $1,000 for a donor, you write a thank you note for that check when you get it, right? The congregation writes a thank you note. It can still go on their giving statement, can still go on their quarterly and their annuals and that sort of thing. But it gets thanked when it's received because it's a special gift to that. And in that thank you, it talks about the progress of the campaign, and it talks about how that, especially if it's an early gift, that donor helped inspire others to be a part of this process so that they see the value and impact of their gift as more than paying for the roof, but inspiring other people to give in that way. It's a really critical piece of this in the thank you. And then also have some kind of celebration at the end of this. People never get tired of celebrating. They get tired of being short, right? And so we change this equation of, oh, we always talk about money, which what they mean is we always talk about being short. People don't mind talking about celebration, right? Yeah. So we change that equation in that way. There's some job descriptions in here. There's some other pieces in here that you can go through, and Pete, Mike, and I stand ready to help design with you anytime in the life of your congregation special appeals. But what I want you to think about in this is, A, how do we build this into the multi-year planning for our congregation? Because there is a section in the book about multi-year planning, so a 4-year plan, what are we going to do, where are we going to take these on? And then B, what are the projects that might go into here? And the things that work really well are very tangible. However, we've also had success with doing a multi-year debt take on these. So Mike in particular likes to build a multi-year debt reduction plan if you're facing some debt, where we do a couple things out of special appeal, a couple things out of annual fund, a couple things out of capital campaign at the end of 5-7 years, depending on where your debt is. We're debt-free in that way. We also have had success with small building projects on these things. Anything with the kids, obviously, is in here. And this, by the way, is separate from that monthly mission moment, right? So if Lutherdale's coming in and you're taking an offering for Lutherdale, that's fine. It doesn't impact this. People segregate that giving in their mind, and they understand those things in that way. But the goal with a special appeal, 3 to 4% of annual operating budget, timed on the off season in order to allow donors to make a larger gift. Questions around that? No,
Comment?
Tuesday morning blues?
If
Yeah.
anybody needs a parking lot fundraiser on how, based on this model, Holy Cross has a wonderful one that was very successful we're willing to share. We have all the different dynamics, all the graphics and everything, so, right? Just don't use our speedometer, true.
The math was bad.
It was illustrative, not specific, and it drove everybody crazy.
You
Anyway,
don't want to go
It actually
fast in
surprises
the parking
at
lot.
how many people gave more at the top end.
It was not divided equally.
Yeah.
Than at the bottom.
So I don't know if you heard that. It surprises how many people gave more at the top end than at the bottom end. That is the truth. That chart, that standard of gifts chart, that speedometer, or whatever you used, what that does is it illustrates for people the need. Remember back at the beginning when we said you have to example the need because people don't understand what the expectation is, right? They've never learned to give. That's the same here. I could come into you and feel like I'm being exceptionally generous and not understand that $25 isn't what you're looking for, right?
we had SUVs, minivans,
Motorcycles, bikes.
sport car, motorcycles, bicycles, you know, the different divisions. And so our highest giving was the highest amount of minivan. We talked about what's parked in your garage, you know, things like that. So it really, it didn't help our year end, but it helped our parking lot.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. With that, one last thing then, as we think about the time of year, it is mid-February. You have your first quarterly reminder and thank you letter to your donors that goes out in March, right? Your quarterly statement. Those are critical, but they do not look like the AT&T bill. Remember, they are a thank you letter. And they talk about the ministry you've accomplished together as a church, and they talk about what will come in the next quarter in the ministry of the church, and they thank people for their giving and remind them of their pledge to the congregation. Those are really critical to that. If you are doing any kind of special push, you can remind people that push, especially like if you're trying to continue to move people to online giving, you can continue that push through those communications as well. If you have anything where you're trying to identify like deferred gifts or something, you can double dip the purposes of those communications. Great story. Last night I was meeting with a congregation in the area who did a whole capital campaign, but as part of their capital campaign we tried to identify who had done deferred gifts in their congregation. Not asking people to do it, but just let us know if you've done it or if you've had any interest in doing it. 19 families identified as having included the church in their estate that they never knew were there in that way. So that kind of additional work on that can make a difference. I saw a question or a comment.
Because a lot of the weekends so far this winter, we've had snow, so attendance has been low. We should just wait till that March letter, or should we be communicating to the congregation?
Hey, you haven't been here since your checks anyway? Is that what you're getting at?
Well, or maybe we could communicate, it's time to sign up for Simply Giving if it's.
Yes, yeah. So that is a tough thing, right? So two things on that. One is you have had snow, you haven't had attendance down. So if you are behind, speed up that quarterly letter. Instead of changing its content or its direction, just advance it in your calendar a little bit. And just, people say, well, then it's not a quarterly letter. It's fine. It goes through February 15th. You're just thanking people for whatever they've given. They're not legally required anyway, right? So just speed them up in that way. But the second thing on that is be careful with the false scarcities, right? So we know January stinks for giving. It's no surprise, right? We know January stinks for giving. And it's one of the worst months in the country for everybody, church, non-church, everything. So don't come out of January and be like, oh, we're already behind. Come out of January and look at January of last year and see where you were, right? And compare year to year, apples to apples and those things before you start messaging those kinds of pieces of scarcity, just to see where you are. But if you need to speed them up, yeah, especially if you've had the snow day stuff. Or encourage people to give online, or send your emails, or move to Tithely, or Simply Giving, or whatever you're doing. Yeah.
I'll just put in a very quick plug there. We're actually going to likely be moving on a Senate level to Tithely because of the functionality. So we've actually been pretty impressed, and I trust Mary Ramskog implicitly. She had a big, long meeting with them and came out and went, I think that's a good product. And she doesn't give praise like that lightly. So. There's a lot
of tools out there, but you've got to deal with them at the best price. So. Thank you all. Oh, yes, ma'am.
The person who is not associated with stewardship, I came from a strategic planning firm.
Yes, ma'am.
But I will say, the idea of giving